The Polish position and the French position are very different. The French have very little at stake. The Poles have everything at stake.
George, you're sort of going through the process of revisiting a number of the forecasts you made in your book, The Next 100 Years, which was released about 15, 16, 17 years ago now in the late noughties. Talk us through your forecast on Poland from then. Poland's come a long way since 1989.
Well, I argued that Poland, as well as Turkey and Japan, would emerge as major powers. The idea at that time of Poland becoming a major power was laughed out of court hilariously. That was not possible. But what I saw in Poland was the single country that was facing the Russians, that placed them in a position that none of the other European countries were placed in, except possibly Romania, that placed them in a position where they could not stay the way they were. The Poles saw themselves as in a desperately poor position. And therefore, I thought at the time that they would have to emerge as a major power. Now we see Poland as about to become a member of the G20, the 20 largest economies in the world, and also having the third largest military force in NATO, after only the United States and Turkey. So Poland has emerged as a major military power because it had to. And it could not become a major military power if it didn't have a significant economy. So nations do what they desperately have to do. And this is why I say we can't talk about Europe, because the Polish position and the French position are very different. The French have very little at stake. The Poles have everything at stake. And on that basis, you can kind of predict what they're going to at least try to do. And my read on Poland was they'd manage to do it.
Obviously, people would look at the map and say, well, Poland is next to Belarus and the Baltic countries and has historically been next to Russia. But, it's not just that simple in terms of where it is on the map. There's more to the geography that matters there.
Well, where you are on the map actually has some significance. So the probability of a Russian invasion of NATO was always minimal. The Russian army, we tended to overestimate its capabilities. The Poles could not assume that the Russians were weak. They did not have that luxury. A victory in Ukraine, first of all, would have put the Russians right on the border of Poland and might have led them to believe that they might be capable of going further west. And so the Poles behaved very differently, and the rest of the Europeans definitely had very strong statements they made, very powerful statements, but their ability to rev up their economies, make a major military force, and so on, those weren't there and weren't needed. So geography matters.
Poland has been somewhere where the biggest wars in the past 200 years have been fought. It's not just Russia that has that memory, it's Poland as well.
Well, we have to remember, in World War II, it began with an invasion simultaneously by the Germans and the Russians of Poland. Remember that Hitler had made a pact with Stalin, a non-aggression pact, which agreed on two things. One, on the division of Poland. Two, a promise that they wouldn't attack each other. The Germans broke that promise. But on the other hand, you have to understand that between Germany and Poland and Russia, Poland was the pivot. Whoever controlled Poland was now in a position to threaten the other country. The solution was to divide Poland in half, and then their two armies were facing each other. So Poland was both a guarantor of peace between Russia and Western Europe, and a guarantor of peace in Russia from Germany.
In many ways, that's part of its desire to grow economically and militarily in the past 30 years since it gained its independence from the Soviet Union. How has it managed to do that?
First, a great deal of discipline. When you're sitting on the firing line, you tend to put aside the transient problems and really focus in on the fundamental things. Secondly, their growth really returned them to the place they should have in Europe. In other words, under Soviet control, their ability to develop was limited, extreme. The Cold War was a very different war because Soviet power was in the middle of Germany. They held East Germany and Poland and everything else. Now they're much further east, and that worries them. The Soviets have a legitimate fear of Western Europe because they've been historically almost destroyed by them. On the other hand, Western Europe has a real fear of the Russians, that they want to move as far west as they can to have buffers. And so what you have here is a very logical progression of geopolitics. It is really about the imperatives nations have. And Poland had the imperative to become a significant military power. Without that economic growth, it could not become that. So it did the things that it had to do in order to survive. Because on the other side of it was Germany, in which they had no trust. So that it emerged as it did is logical, predictable.
I mean, looking at their military for a second, they now have the third largest military in NATO after the US and Turkey. They would obviously worry Russia if a conflict broke out in some way. But would they be a match for them now?
Well, on the attack, no. One thing that has been proven by a man as brilliant as Napoleon Bonaparte and by a man as ruthless as Adolf Hitler, you cannot conquer Russia. It is too vast. It has too much of a population that is willing to fight to defend itself. It's very cold in the winter. And these are all fundamental things that were learned. No one in his right mind, or that studies history at all, is going to invade Russia. The idea that Poland would be a threat to Russia, if Nazi Germany couldn't be a threat to Russia, if Napoleon Bonaparte couldn't be a threat to Russia, Poland's not going to be a threat. So the Russians, however, also look at it another way. Yes, Napoleon Bonaparte was not a threat to its survival. Yes, Hitler wasn't a threat to Russia, but it was devastating. Those wars were devastating to Russia and perhaps put them generations behind of what the economic growth could have been.
For the full episode and much more, go to geopoliticalfutures.com/podcast.